So today we will practice. Yesterday we did about mitral stenosis. Today we will try to study the normal micturition and how it is altered in a neurogenic bladder. And we will learn as to how to know the entire management of a neurogenic bladder. So the first diagram that you have to remember is that this is the prostatic urethra, this is the bladder, and this prostatic urethra converts into membranous urethra, which crosses the deep perineal pouch. This deep perineal pouch is lined by the perineal membrane and the superior fascia of the urogenital diaphragm. Then the superficial perineal pouch consists of pouches which enclose the testes, and this ends in the perineal urethra. If you see the side view, this is the perineal membrane, this is the deep perineal pouch, here you have the superficial perineal pouch, and here you have the urethra, the cholecys fascia of the penis, which goes into the abdomen. So here are the abdominal muscles, the linea alba. So this membranous urethra pierces the perineal membrane, lies in the corpora spongiosa, and then becomes the penile urethra aided by corpora cavernosa, and this is the dorsal ligament of the penis. And this is the difference between the penile urethra and the perineal urethra. This part is the membranous urethra. Above it you have the urethra enclosed by the prostate gland, and above this you have the bladder, and the bladder is somewhat pyramidal in shape, and on the two ends of the bladder enter the ureters. So crossing these ureters from above and medial like this are the vas deferens, and these vas deferens come and with the ducts of the seminal vesicles form the ejaculatory duct, which opens into the verumontanum of the prostatic urethra. On the apex of the bladder is the urachus, which connects it with the umbilicus. So this anatomy you remember, and this is the urogenital diaphragm. Behind you have the sacrum like this, and the space, there is the levator ani muscle. The levator ani, and this levator ani converts this rectum into the anal canal. On both sides of the anal canal is the ischiorectal fossa on right and left side. Here, since it's a lateral view, we are able to show you the anterior and posterior part of it. And between the levator ani and the ischiorectal fossa, there is the anterior recess of the ischiorectal fossa. On both sides you have the testes, with the epididymis and the vas deferens. So this is the basic structure of the bladder, and now you will see it here. The ureteric opening, the interureteric crest, the trigone, the eminence of the median lobe of the prostate. Anything above the ejaculatory duct is the median lobe of the prostate. The posterior urethric crest, the viru montanum, the ejaculatory ducts opening into the prostatic urethra by a H-shaped fissure, which is called as utriculus masculinus, and this is the viru montanum, and this is the prominence of the median lobe of prostate. And here you have the trigone, which consists of a smooth mucosa. Here you have the ureteric opening, and you have the interureteric crest, and here the mucosa is rugose, and therefore in a distended bladder you will not be able to see the rugosities, but in a collapsed bladder you will always be able to see the thing. Now these are the ureters on both sides, and you have the vas deferens coming from above and then turning downwards to form the ejaculatory ducts, crossing the ureters above and in front. So this is the vas deferens, and the ureter is going below it. All right. The ureter is passing below it. Now this finishes off the mucosa, and here you have the internal sphincter of the bladder and basically a layer of muscle which is crisscross, neither circular nor longitudinal. And the importance of this crisscross arrangement of muscle, which is shared by the bladder and the uterus, is that normally a muscle would contract, that means become this big, but when it relaxes it will retain its original length. But these crisscross muscles would contract from this size, they will become this size, but because of the crisscross fibers, even when they are relaxing they will retain the original contraction, and this is retraction. So they contract, relax and retract. That's the difference between this circular muscle, which is more circular inside and more longitudinal on its outer surface. And between there is this crisscross arrangement where the circular longitudinal layer transits and becomes circular as it goes from outside to inside. The importance is that there is the fascia transversalis outside this. The veins lie between the fascia transversalis and the muscle. So here are the veins. But the arteries to reach the mucosa have to cross this crisscross. So if the bladder is contracted, then the arteries cannot push blood into the mucosa and the hematuria would get arrested. Whereas if the bladder is distended, the veins would collapse but the arteries would not, and therefore in a distended bladder there will be more hematuria. Now after the prostatic urethra and the internal sphincter, you have the external sphincter here, and this external sphincter is supplied by the pudendal nerve. So, after understanding this much of the anatomy of the bladder, let us understand the physiology of micturition. As the urine goes on pumping from the ureter into the bladder, and you see the ureter have an oblique course through the muscle, therefore as the pressure increases here, the ureteric orifice closes. So there is no ureteric reflux. If the ureter is very tight and it cannot close, there will be a vesico-ureteric reflux of urine, which will lead to back pressure, a hydroureter, and hydronephrosis. Such a ureter which cannot close is seen in TB of the urinary bladder and the kidney and is called as golf hole ureter. So now, after understanding this much about the bladder, let us understand the physiology of micturition. How is normal micturition occurs? The first thing is that the bladder fills. Maximum up to 400 cc. As bladder fills, there is a muscular reflex which relaxes the internal sphincter but increases contraction of the muscle of the rest of the bladder. Now, as that happens, some urine, as this internal sphincter relaxes here, some urine trickles into the prostatic urethra. Now, as it trickles into the prostatic urethra, there is a message sent to the spinal cord through chemoreceptors, which say that there is urine in the prostatic urethra. Through these chemoreceptors are maximum in the region of the viru montanum. From the spinal cord, there is a shower of impulses on both ureteric orifices, and therefore this localized uncoordinated contraction of the urinary bladder becomes coordinated from the two ureteric orifices, and it becomes much more powerful. The other thing that the spinal cord does, now this is the spinal reflex getting active. Other thing is that the spinal cord will inform the cortex, cerebral cortex, that your bladder needs to be evacuated, and therefore you start finding an appropriate place, and when you find an appropriate place, you relax the pudendal nerve. Pudendal nerve is preventing the urine from getting out. So you relax the pudendal nerve voluntarily, and therefore the urine starts flowing out, and the spinal reflex is active till the last drop of urine goes out. Therefore the micturition is sustained by the spinal reflex till the last drop is out. After void, still about 50 cc of urine can remain in the bladder, and this is called as post-void residual urine. All right. And all this electrical activity which is occurring, which causes this miracle of micturition, is from the spinal cord. And we'll see what happens when the spinal cord is disrupted in the next paper. So we told you that there is the cortex, there is the spinal cord, and from the battery of the cortex, the reticular activating system, there are fibers that descend and they control the spinal cord. Electrical activity of the spinal cord. So here is the electric supply. And here are the generators. So as soon as there is disruption, electric supply shuts off. And from the generators here, you have the local reflex of the bladder. So this is the smaller generator. So as soon as the electric supply shuts off, these generators will take time to come on, and therefore the bladder would initially go into neurogenic retention. That means no matter how much the bladder expands, it will not contract. Now these smaller generators are much near the problem. So the second thing that happens is that these smaller generators get active, and when there is lot of volume in the bladder, that means overflow, then some urine dribbles out without a stream. So this is when these smaller generators have got active, and this is called as autonomous bladder. Because this autonomous bladder would drain only with over distension, and it will drain in the dribble. And after the evacuation, if you do a catheterization, which is called as intermittent catheterization, you would find that the post-void residual is greater than 100 cc. So the treatment of such an autonomous bladder is intermittent catheterization till post-void residual falls below 100 cc. Then the spinal reflex gets active, and when the spinal reflex gets active, the bladder would evacuate earlier, that means with less volume is stored. It will evacuate in a stream because of the spinal reflex, but it will not tell the cord, and it cannot hold the urine. So such a bladder is called as automatic bladder, and here the post-void residual is less than 100 cc. Finally, the message starts. If you want to treat this bladder, you can put this is the umbilicus, this is the suprapubic region, so you can put your fist in the suprapubic region and press, and by expression you would be able to initiate micturition at fixed times. So if there is total output is 1200 cc's 24 hours, then you want the bladder to expand to 400 cc's. So 3 times you will be able to evacuate the bladder. So this is the place that you press, and this is known as Creed's method of evacuation. So in an autonomous bladder, you do intermittent catheterization at the same time, about 3 times if the volume is 1200 cc's. And after that, you can do Creed's method and keep on measuring the post-void residual for some time, and as it goes to reach less than 50 cc or 50 cc, which is normal. So this is called as an automatic bladder. Then gradually the person knows when the bladder is full, so your sticking to this regimen may not work, and that is a sensate bladder. And gradually the external sphincter gets activated and the pudendal nerve control comes back, and therefore you see partial motor control, and then finally a normal bladder. So this sort of tells you the sequence of events after there is section of the spinal cord, either in quadriplegia or in paraplegia. Now, what are the complications of a neurogenic bladder? The first can be hematuria. And if there are clots, then these have to be, they can cause obstruction and they have to be evacuated. And if you keep the bladder collapsed, use drugs like strexamanic acid and produce diuresis by plenty of water, then hematuria can be arrested. With hematuria, there is always infection, and for infection you have to give levofloxacin, 500 or 750 OD for 7 days, and you have to alkalinate the urine by giving potassium tartrate syrup in water. So after this you must understand that if this is the bladder, this is the prostate, this is the vas deferens and the ejaculatory duct, and this vas deferens is leading to the epididymis and the testes, and these are the ureters. Then urinary tract infection can lead to hydroureter hydronephrosis and pyonephrosis, and can also lead to chronic pyelonephritis. On the other hand, there can be urethritis, there can be prostatitis in the prostatic urethra. This can travel into the vas deferens, which is funiculitis, then epididymitis and orchitis. So one way the infection can travel is this. And therefore, early culture and sensitivity and antibiotic according to culture and sensitivity is important. in the perineal or penile urethra, there can be a urethritis, there can be periurethral abscess, and there can be urethral fistula. And if infection persists for long period of time, there may be amyloidosis or chronic renal failure. So these are the complications of the neurogenic bladder.